I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're speaking with author Mark Searby, who is bringing to life an unprecedented examination of a cinematic legend in his amazing book called Al Pacino, The Movies Behind the Man. With meticulous attention to detail, this author dives deep into the expansive filmography of Al Pacino, offering readers an intimate look into the behind the scenes of each film by coupling in-depth analysis with exclusive interviews from those who worked closest with Pacino. His work stands out as a definitive guide for both film enthusiasts and fans of the iconic actor. He's now out with an equally compelling podcast. It is called All About Al, the Pacino podcast. We are delighted to have Mark join us here today on Spotlight, and we ask viewers like you to support creators like him by subscribing to our channel. Mark, great to see you today.
Yeah, you too, Logan. Wow, that was an introduction. Thank you.
I can end the show right there, right? And that's all, folks. We'll be back next week with a whole lot more about other actors other than Al Pacino. But let me ask the big question. Why, of all the millions of actors out there, did you choose Pacino?
Oh, it's such a good question. It's a question I'm always asked. And the thing is, it goes back to my teenage years when we're starting to formulate who we are, who we like, in the film world. And I was just drawn to Pacino's work. Scent of a Woman was the film I watched constantly growing up as a teenager. Dick Tracy around that time as well. Then moving forward a little bit, Any Given Sunday by the end of the 90s. So the 90s period when Pacino was so rife in those big movies, that's when I became the fan. So I've always been a fan since the 1990s. And then obviously it snowballed from there. And then when I started to review movies and write for film magazines here in the UK, an editor of mine said, well, you know a lot about Pacino. You should write a book. And that's kind of when it kicked into another gear. Let's be honest here, Logan. It went from being a super fan to something more, basically.
Yeah, you went to being a super fan to being an expert on Pacino, who has, truly examined his life, truly examined his work, has spoken in depth with people who have worked with Pacino, people such as myself. Let me ask you, what is Pacino's secret to his stellar performances? From everything you've whittled away at, everything you've examined, all the people you've talked to, why is he so powerful and compelling?
Whew, that's a really big question to answer, but I'm going to try and narrow it down. I think that it's a lot to do with the fact that he has this ability to draw you in. We know he's a method actor. He studied at the Actors Studio. He spent a lot of time working with Brando, who obviously was the poster child for method acting, and Pacino's gone on from there. So I think it's the ability to become this chameleon-like actor where he can play almost anything, and us as viewers be transfixed by it. You think about his performance as Sonny Wozniak in Dog Day Afternoon, next to Michael Corleone in The Godfather, and then you bring it up to date, with something like The Irishman, or even some fun stuff as well, some jokey stuff, something like Frankie and Johnny, where he's playing a short order cook. You're constantly transfixed by these performances. And I think that's what draws us in as viewers, is that we want to know what he's doing. We want to know what he's playing at. We want to know what the performance is. The other thing that I think, and this is rare, I think, nowadays, but is the fact that he's an actor who is fearless. He will take on roles that a lot of other actors, I would say 99% of actors, would not dare take on. I mentioned their Dog Day Afternoon. Don't think many people would have taken on playing an LGBTQ plus character in the 1970s, let alone about now. That's the thing. Right. You think about the fact that in the 70s, he was known for being a gritty, really hard actor that was, no emotion. In the 80s, he changed that. He did a few comedies. Then he did a movie, Sea of Love, erotic thriller. In the 90s, just changing it up all the time. In the noughties, doing some bits here and there, but also doing some Shakespeare as well. So I think the fact that he's never been afraid to do characters that a lot of people would otherwise do. And I think that's the thing that, he's got no ego. This. Listen, you know this, Logan. You've worked with him.
Yeah.
The man has no ego.
Exactly. He's a sweet man. He's a humble man. He is a man who is an actor's actor, because he's not just a leading man. I mean, John Wayne is one of my favorites, but John Wayne said quite often that all I do is play John Wayne. I've done quite well. But that's not true with Al Pacino. Al Pacino really is, Michael Corleone. He really is, Jack Kevorkian. He becomes a character, so he's more than a leading man. And like you said, he's been so iconic over the course of his career, from The Godfather to Scarface to even movies like Insomnia, which
Yeah.
is a great movie that, wasn't a
Yeah.
huge blockbuster, but was such a great performance.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Insomnia is actually one of my favorite Pacino movies. A good friend of mine who's a fellow film critic absolutely detests that movie. So we always have a little banter back and forth about, who's right and who's wrong. But I agree with you. That's a movie that actually changed Pacino's course again. There was that sort of, he was coming to a point where it was looking like he was falling into that trap of playing the same type of characters over and over. And yes, I know Insomnia, he's playing a policeman again, but it's different. This is
Yeah.
that's a different performance, and that's what we get with Pacino. We rarely get the same performance in any movie. It's always different. It's always thoughtful. It's always interesting.
And at 83 years old, he seems like he's still very relevant and has a lot of productive years ahead of him, don't you think?
Oh, let's keep our fingers crossed that he does. I mean, I can't wait to see what is coming next from him. I'm always excited. And whether it's in front of the camera or whether it's on stage, we've got to remember that he was on stage. This was 2018, 2019, doing shows, doing plays 6 nights a week.
Right.
This guy's almost in his 80s.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, he's never going to stop. And I think that's the beauty, is that he loves acting so much that he doesn't want to retire. He might slow down doing the amount of movies he's releasing each year, but he's still going to be doing those movies. He still wants to be out there. He still wants to be acting.
Let me throw a curveball at you, and it is AI. Let's say we can take AI and create a 40-year-old Al Pacino. They kind of did it in The Irishman. They de-aged him. It wasn't very effective. But now, as we see what AI can do, we can envision films down the road starring Al Pacino, when Al Pacino might not even be alive anymore. Is that a wonderful thing? Is that an awful thing? Is the jury still out? I'll throw it your way.
I think that's quite a frightening thing. I don't think we, certainly myself as a fan, would want to see a movie where Al Pacino is in his 30s that's made after his death or at this point in time, because we know realistically that's not Al Pacino. That's a carbon copy. That's a copy. It's not him. The method behind Pacino's performances have not gone into that at all. So I think frightening, and I hope it never comes to pass.
Even if there was going to be a Godfather 5, let's say. Let me tease you with that. Like,
well,
in a way, it's sort of like, why not? If you can create something, why not? Maybe it'll be awful. Maybe it'll be great. Maybe it won't be Pacino. Maybe it'll be something different. Maybe it'll be something that transcends Pacino. I don't know. I do think the jury is still out. I mean, I would love to see some of the great actors, Humphrey Bogart, Clark Gable, Cary Grant, put into different situations today. And like, it might just be a niche film for fans that are on some kind of streaming service. I mean, we have that today. So it might be kind of cool. It might be kind of awful. It depends, right?
I guess it does. I guess it depends on which side of the border you fall on, as to whether you think it would be cool or whether you think it would be absolutely horrible. I am in agreement with you to a certain degree that the jury is still out. Yeah. I think what we've got with somebody like Pacino is we've got those performances from that time period where he was still learning the craft. I mean, he's still learning the craft now. That's the beauty of it. I don't think I would want to see AI go back and create an almost pitch perfect performance, because I think that's the beauty with somebody like Pacino, is that he won't stick to the script. He'll go off script, and moments like that appear in the movie. We wouldn't get that with AI. It would be, this is it. That's how you get it. this is the Pacino. Whereas the Pacino we get now, some of these lines, they're not in the script, and they're
Right.
great. They're iconic lines. So I would much rather prefer to see that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But it is an intriguing question. And you're right. He is such a compelling improviser and ad-libber as an actor. And the 3 times I've worked with him, 2 of the times we've actually improvised scenes, and it was a ton of fun. He is so good at it. And so many actors, surprisingly, aren't. They're used to sticking to the script. You throw out a line that's not scripted, and they're like, wait a minute, I didn't get my cue. So Pacino is not like that. Let's talk about your podcast, All About Al. I know we have 1 episode streaming so far. Tell me what your vision for this podcast is.
Well, I want it to be an extension of my book, because my book came out in 2017 and it was very well liked, a lot of nice reviews. And that was a deep dive into his work. And it also, as you said right at the start of it, it got interviews in there with people who had worked with Al. But over the years, lots of people had said to me, when are you going to release a second book? Because, Al's still working. This is the thing. And I always thought, there needs to be something, but time and money wait for no man anymore. So I just thought, let's do a podcast. Loads of people have got podcasts now. Let's do a podcast. Let's get the people on who have worked with Al, and you can hear them in their own voices tell the stories that you want to hear, what it's like working with Pacino. How did you get the job? Was it fun? Was it hard work? All of these. So that's where the idea for the podcast came from. And it's kind of a split in between interviewing people who have worked with Al and then also speaking to fellow film critics and academic scholars about movies. So some of the interviews that are forthcoming will be with lots of actors like yourself. And then there will also be talking to film critics. So we'll be talking about certain movies on there. But one of my favorite podcasts one of the favorite podcasts that I've done so far was actually talking to a Shakespeare academic scholar here in the UK. And she teaches Shakespeare. So she knows a lot about it. So we talked about his performance in The Merchant of Venice. And it was absolutely fascinating what she had got to say about his performance as Shylock compared to lots of other performances that she had seen and also been involved in as well. So that's what I want to find. I want to find how people compare Pacino's performances in certain things to others as well. I just want to find what makes the man tick. And I don't think we're going to ever find that, but I'm going to try.
Well, I know you talked to me for an hour about Pacino, and we had a great conversation. And I think it's interesting that instead of writing another book, you put together a podcast, because putting together a podcast is sort of like writing a book, except you're putting all the research out there. All of the hours of interviews that people might not hear or might not read excerpts from, they're actually getting to listen as you're actually doing the interview. So it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition of having the book and having the podcast, because you actually get to hear the people who've worked with them in their own voices. I'd imagine you kind of feel the same way.
I do. I think that's the beauty of it, is that you do get to hear them in their own voices. I had a lot of people say to me, are you going to interview Jerry Schatzberg, who had obviously worked with Pacino twice on Scarecrow and Panic in Needle Park? And the thought did cross my mind, but I interviewed him for my book. So we would be going over old ground. So if you want to read what Jerry's got to talk about working with Al, it's in the book. So instead, I went deeper and I spoke to the screenwriter of Scarecrow, who talked completely different game compared to Jerry Schatzberg. But that's what I like. I like finding these different stories that we would get from all of these different people. The stories that you told me are completely different to the other stories that other people have told me, and yet they're still really interesting. And that's the beauty of it, is that you're coming out of these, I hope you're coming out of these podcasts not just having learned something, but also enjoyed it, and maybe having had a little giggle along the way as well.
Absolutely. It's a fun podcast. It's an innovative podcast. It is called All About Al, the Pacino podcast. It features Mark Searby, who is a wonderful writer as well. He has the definitive guide to a cinematic legend, Al Pacino. The name of the book is Al Pacino, The Movies Behind the Man. Mark, thanks so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Oh, thank you, Logan. I've really enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it as well. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.